Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about employee adaptability, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Michelle Boulé. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important to say, which I didn't say when we were talking just before we started, is that my background is primarily as a dancer.
Hmm.
I'm an artist. So when I've worked with executives, it's often the ones who are have the creative eccentric mind, or I can bring balance to the person who's a bit more left-brained and bring in that right brain space. So my background is in dance, and I started dancing 40 years ago and continue. But along that journey, through a lot of disappointments, injuries, failures, because I wanted to continue dancing, I had that vision for myself personally. Somehow I found a route which led, to dance again after significant injury. Ended up living in New York City for 21 years, had an international award-winning career as a performer, teacher, and choreographer in contemporary dance. And through that time, just because what I learned about being able to continue dancing first started with just on a body level with injuries, but then I realized the connection to our emotions and our mental outlook or our mindset, and then ultimately expanding beyond that into the world of energy and consciousness. So I started also really studying that work, using it as my research, teaching my students. And in 2008, I started an energy healing practice that I did alongside my professional career, seeing hundreds of clients, mostly in New York, but also globally.
Mm. Oh, that's fantastic. And so, before we really get to the conversation of adaptability, I think, there's a little bit of a foundation to lay. And one of the things you talk about are universal truths. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, so these are primarily you would see them as the universal laws. And there are a minimum of seven. There are subsets of these different laws, but they are a baseline for how the universe operates. One simple one being the law of cause and effect. So if in your business there is something showing up, that's great. There was a cause to that. If there's something showing up that's a problem, there was a cause to that. And everything is operating by cause and effect. And just helping a person see, are you getting the results that you want now? If not, let's change that cause. I mean, super basic, right? But then also another one layered on top of that is the law of polarity. And it's just that everything is created as a whole. So if there is a problem, there is always a solution, always, always, always. And my clients know that, so they're less prone to panic because it's just everything is created as a whole. The problem can't exist without the solution. So I get people to really start focusing there, because there's another law that, that's a cause and effect, right? If you can stay focused on the solution and figure out how to organize your team around that, you're focusing energy there. That's what will grow. So when I'm working with people, we're going through these constantly, and it just becomes a way of thinking. Like, they can just pull them up like that. But then also, because of my dance and somatics background, I get people also to feel these laws in their body. They're present everywhere. So having an understanding of them just brings really organized, orderly thinking to whatever process or whatever growth you're trying to create in your organization.
Mm, that's really fascinating. I really, I've never thought about what you said, that every problem has to have a solution.
Too.
Would love to hear, I mean, maybe a little bit then how you help people even come to terms with that, or just a little bit more about that truth. That's a really interesting one.
Well, what's interesting, even I could say underneath this, which your question made me think of, is we are all designed to succeed. Like, we are just like every single plant, animal out there, that through the so many years of evolution and genetics and whatnot, like, we've been crafted into being successful. right? The thing about humans is that we have, as far as we know, separate from other species on the planet, the ability to think with an intellect. So whereas the bear, I live in Montana, so I've been seeing a lot of bears lately. I actually ran away from one last week. That was the closest call I've had. And maybe
Wow.
not the best. Yeah, maybe not the best thing to run, but
I was about to
I'm
say,
here.
I thought with bears it was lay down and play dead, but I don't know.
I think it can depend on proximity, but I just saw this cute, cute quote unquote head popping up above the grass, and I kind of knew, and then I just bolted like a deer. So,
Wow.
and all to say, I'm safe. And now
Yes,
I've taken us off
obviously,
track from the
yes. You
question.
live to be on our show, so that's good.
Well, here, okay, now I remember. So the bear is not questioning that it's a bear,
Right.
right? But what do we do as humans? We start to learn to question our own truth.
Mm,
And that's what causes the conflict. And some people would say that when you're in pain or when something's not going wrong, you're not operating by the truth. The truth you could look at as the universal laws. The truth could be, in a personal relationship, honoring who you are and what you want. I mean, ultimately, it always comes back to down to that with a person. Maybe you're not asking, you're not delegating away, whether it's your family or your team, in a way that really supports your highest good, right? So then that turns into uh, resentment, passive aggressive behavior, whatnot. So what we don't realize, this is just part of how we are raised as a species. We're given, before we're 7 years old, we have no conscious mind. So whatever your parents, your teachers, your clergy told you is just absorbed right into you, and it runs automatically. You can't reject it. And the science says that 95% of our thoughts are repetitive all day long, and 70 to 75%, that number could be even higher, of those thoughts are self-sabotaging and negative.
mm.
So, with leadership personally, and also with leading other people, it's about really coming clean with, okay, what is it that what is the who am I? What is it that I'm trying to create, and how can I really operate from integrity
Mm.
within myself? And when I know, just because I've led as a teacher, I've led teams, my business team, I've led as a choreographer. When I'm not in that integrity, I can't serve. So I've been a huge proponent also of self-care and helping people really see, just like Gandhi said, the only demons we have to fight are within ourselves.
Mm.
So we have so much power as individuals to help the collective.
You
So
know,
that's just,
yeah, I think before we go to adaptability, that maybe one little tangent might be interesting. Is that around that self-talk and the negative self-talk? And I guess what sprung to mind a little bit is, I think a lot of the challenges that women have in the workplace actually have nothing to do with men, and have to do with their own self-confidence and their how they show up. Um,
Mhm.
and so, putting barriers like, I'm not good enough to ask for a raise, or I'm not, I don't have 100% of the qualifications to apply for the job. And so how do you stop that talk track, especially if you don't believe with what you're trying to replace it with? Because I know there's a lot of people who are like, oh, or there's a lot of recommendations out there of write what you see yourself as, and then speak it on a daily basis. But
Sure.
that I can imagine that could be hard if you don't actually believe it.
100%. And actually, it can send a person in the wrong direction, right? Because a thought without emotion behind it, right? Like the emotion of I'm afraid of this or I don't believe it, has no power. It's the emotion that actually carries that thought and makes it more powerful. So it's like you really have to start small.
Mm,
Part of this is having someone else around you who believes in you, surrounding yourself. This is why that team development is so important. Like having a group of people, an environment, having mentors, even if you don't know them, but that you're tapping into that information that literally has a vibration. That's another universal law, the law of vibration. Everything is a frequency. And we know that from quantum physics too. It's like everything is a wave until we witness that wave into a particle. I might have just lost some people with too much science there, but so so for a person who is struggling with that belief, there's just simple work. Like, one of the questions I always start with my clients is, what do you want? And that is a question that people will live their entire lives without touching. Because again, prior to 7, we learned that we weren't worthy to ask for what we want, to be who we are, right? It's like you're cheered on as a child to start to walk, but then when you go to mom and dad maybe and you say like, I want to be the president, especially in the recent years, your parents be like, what are you talking about? If that's really true for the kid, or a parent's own fears, right? And I do believe that everyone has the best intentions, or
Mhm.
the parent's own trauma that wasn't resolved. It's like that Carl Jung quote that the biggest burden on the child is the unlived life of the parent.
Mm.
No blame. I don't believe in blame, right? I feel like we've all been born here to overcome our difficulties and in that way contribute. But for that person who's struggling, like, as I said, there's always a solution. And part of what I know to be true for myself and what I help my clients to lean into, and you see this with so many successful people, is that everything they've experienced, whether that's been abuse or poverty or injury or loss, all of that contributes to who they are today and who they are yet to become. So bringing in gratitude, and it might, you may not want to be ready to dig back that far into all the things that you've experienced in your life, but I guarantee you the energy of those things will come up because a person needs to integrate and overcome them if they want to grow. So, really simple. What do you want? And also just shifting your perspective to what is good right now. There's always
Mhm.
something good right now. And that starts a momentum, just like anything with inertia. It starts a momentum. And if I can, help a person stay focused on where they want to go rather than what they don't have, that's a cause and effect. That focus trains literally parts of the brain to start organizing in that direction. So it really needs to also start with a decision. Am I willing to make this change? Am I willing to undergo some discomfort? Because that's a part of change too. And there's a whole biological explanation behind why that discomfort is always a part of change, except for maybe the few whose brains are a little different. But we get used to it too. The more you grow, um, and the more you go through change, which is really the nature of life, the more you develop the skills to be able to do it again and do it again and do it again.
And so I guess now if we take it up a level, right, and we think about
Mhm.
an organization and there's change within that, or even I guess even I suppose organizations are made up of individuals who are all dealing with um whatever's going on in their life
Yeah.
at the moment. um how do leaders support them then through and help them with being adaptable to the changes that they face?
Yeah, I think, there's always something about education, right? Like, I know, many companies bring in programs for self-care or stress relief, or improving mindset. So I think it's really important to have that have that be part of the culture of an organization. What can we do to take ourselves into expansion? I was speaking with the leader of a big arts organization in New York City at the early on in the pandemic, and everyone's freaking out, right? Like, especially for some arts organizations where everything is in person, like you can't not do it in person, or it's different and it's difficult. So bringing in, what I find is just bringing in like teaching people how to think,
Mm,
like even just knowing, like, and that's where these universal laws can be so helpful. Even just knowing, okay, there's always a solution. let's
right.
let's let's start focusing there, because what's going to happen if we stay focused on the problem? Not
Mm,
much, right? The problem, we're just going to add energy to the problem and complaints and whatnot. It's like, I think there's something about always having a really clear mission and making sure that that's imbued in the culture and that people are on board for that. And
mhm,
when and I also feel like a heart-based mission,
yeah,
because we're all here to connect. And
right.
the biggest uh I think challenge from this pandemic is we lost so much connection, and people who already had trouble with that, that got exaggerated.
Yeah.
So how can we look at this? There's a solution here, right? There's an opportunity. We have an opportunity now in history to really work on how we're connecting to each other, because if we don't, we're going to destroy each other. So I feel like bringing in also a heart-based, uh relatable, right? The heart is how we connect. So if there's space for that in an organization, and whether that's through the leadership or through other people they bring in to help people learn how to really use self-care,
Mm,
how to make sure that this is actually uh a normal part of life. It's
right.
not an accessory. It is necessary. And I think what that also, it will bleed into people's homes. It'll
Mm,
bleed into their relationships. So, it's a real win-win. It's something I learned in my early 20s after my injuries, that it wasn't just like an accessory. It was essential for
and
my own success and for being able to help other people.
yeah, and I guess how do you help people see, I suppose the value both at the maybe a manager level and then at the person level, because I think you come across some people and I can just hear what they have to say as, oh, this is just um
Oof.
yeah, foo-foo, warm and fuzzy, like, whatever, we don't
Yeah.
talk about this. This is not the space we get into. That's personal, or
Mhm.
something like that. So what's kind of your response to them?
Well, growth happens in spaces where people are comfortable.
Mhm.
So it's not like, with my energy healing practice that I used to do this, well, I still do it, but um, this energy work where I'm muscle testing and asking for priorities, for connection and healing for this particular person. And people, like, it's the body talk system, and it's so systematic the way it's set up. It's super left brain, and it allows you to just bring a lot of information in. And what was fascinating was people be like, how'd you know that? Like, you like, do you know everything about me now? And it's like, no, I don't, and I don't want to. But I think I don't think we ever need to feel forced to bring something to the table that we're not ready to bring to
Mm,
the table. And it's not like now everyone has to share their deepest secrets.
mhm,
But how can we create a space where people start to feel seen and whole and comfortable? So that maybe, two people are talking and they're like, wow, that's, I'm having trouble with my son too. We don't have to pretend that everything is okay.
right.
And I think that comes from leadership too. Like, yes, the leader needs to really be the point of the clarity of holding that vision. Um, but also, like that person, the leaders have hearts too, and I think, um, leading with that vulnerability,
Mm,
uh, also gives people space, again, just to feel safe. We literally, this is our biology, right? Like, we have these two aspects of our nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. When we're in the sympathetic, we're in the fight, flight, freeze, faint. And when we're in the parasympathetic, we're in the creation, we're regeneration, grow, connect. and they can't happen at the same time. So it's necessary in whatever way is appropriate for a particular business's culture to find the places where people can literally, their nervous systems can relax, right? Because then we feel safe to create. It's the same thing that happened when we were kids. Our biology doesn't change when we, hit 30, 40, 50 or whatever. So I think ultimately it's about how do we create spaces for connection. And I would say, it's like probably not many corporations would want to bring in like I don't know if I would, like crystal balls, right? I'm like jumping to a far extreme,
Mm,
right? But you can find ways and find people, to bring in that can help people feel comfortable, can help bring back play and safety. And like, who are you? I want to talk to you today. Like what's been going on? So it's not just like we're here checking off the boxes and getting the work done like a machine. No, this is a person. These are
right.
people that
Mm,
you're leading. And I think, the one thing I'm hearing is, it could go too far, right? But it's not just like soft, soft, soft. It's empowering people to have agency, to understand personal responsibility,
mm,
to feel empowered in their role, to feel connected to purpose, to feel connected to accomplishment, contribution. And again, when a person is feeling great in their workplace, you're giving them the gift of that translating into the rest of their life.
right, right. I think you've done some, that there's some good tie-in from some of the conversation that we've had around Ken Blanchard's, seven rules for change or seven
Mhm.
principles of change. Do you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, the first one that he has is people will feel awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious.
Mm,
So the reason this happens is because we all have a subconscious mind, and that has two jobs. One is to keep us alive, and the other is to procreate.
mm,
So the way I talk about this with my clients is that it's basically saying, you're alive now in this moment, don't change anything. It recognizes the patterns. This could be like the way the business is running, where my desk is, like all these things, right? So what happens when change arises is it's a new pattern that the subconscious mind doesn't recognize. So it is going to create those feelings of fear, this, awkward.
mm,
I was talking to a client last week about she really needed to change her prices. And she was like, I feel so uncomfortable. And I'm like, I know, it's just unfamiliar. So there's something about helping usher people into that unfamiliar space. And yes, the confidence of a leader, the knowledge and experience of a leader helps with that.
mm,
Um, so and that's where again I would say, for leaders to really be doing always be in the personal development, um, and the word we've been using, self-care, to be able to show up fully
mhm,
for your team. Um, Another one, the second one that he has is people initially focus on what they have to give up.
mm,
So there's a law here, a universal law called the law of sacrifice. And that law states that in order to move to something of a higher nature, you have to let go of something of a lower nature. So, if someone wants to be an Olympic athlete, they can't spend, half the day watching TV and eating potato chips. Like that might be the lower nature. No judgment on that, right? But it's not the thing that allows the person to step up. But what's interesting, what is pointed out in these 7 dynamics of change, is that people will focus on what they have to give up. So I think that's a really important one because we can see it, we know it, it's a pattern, right? We recognize the thing we're leaving,
yeah.
but real transformation and new creation comes in the unknown. So there's something here about teaching a person to really start to focus on leaning into faith, which again, I think the universal laws really help guide a person through these challenges. And knowing that in the unknown is the place where any kind of significant change or transformation occurs.
Mm.
So, going through these and looking at them with an organization can be so helpful in the constant of business, which is change. I mean, the constant of life.
Yeah. It's interesting you said about the loss. There was I was reading some works where they were saying that people will it may be like a 5% loss, valuating against a 50% gain, like between two
Mm,
choices, and people will choose more often to avoid the loss than go
mm.
with the gain. Like they're just more oriented about preventing loss. It's more painful. So it's interesting that then that ties back to what you were saying about a universal truth.
Yeah, that's a fascinating statistic. I hadn't heard that, but it also makes me think of that negativity bias,
Yeah.
in the brain that, for one negative thing, you need to balance it with five positive things. Can't remember if that's the exact number, but
That's
um,
Well, I think I've read that in parenting. So
mm,
yeah, yeah, that's interesting as well. And it's really interesting that it's hard to get those messages through, like that they're harder to believe. The positive messages seem to be harder to believe than the negative ones.
yeah, I mean, well, if you look at it again from sort of like a biological standpoint, a lot of us are living our lives based on survival.
Mm,
Right. So we're going to look at what what can again, like, how can we not change anything?
hmm.
So but that's really counter to life. Life is always expanding and changing. So I think, starting to really understand first, because knowledge always precedes the wisdom gained through experience. So I think there's something to be said for, like, gathering this information, like that thing that you read, and looking at these seven dynamics of change, looking at the universal laws, and just seeing, okay, how can we start to understand this first, but then the part that a lot of people avoid is actually enacting it, right?
Hmm.
Like, so many people will read a book, or even, like, in a lot of self-help or business or personal development programs, the statistic is like, for online courses, like, the rate of completion is so low when there's not a person who's there live. And also, even for, I think this is just a general statistic, the people, like, it's not even, it's maybe like 15% of people that actually take the thing and implement the change.
Hmm.
And those are probably the leaders who will continue to guide and support other people where they are. And it's all a process too, right? Like, I think there's, everyone, this is another one of the dynamics of change, is like, it's people can only handle so much.
Right.
So I think, like, recognizing some people love change, others don't.
I
It's
do.
like,
Probably a little too much, and
oh, really? Yeah, it's I mean, I think, just like seeing that in the people you're working with, and in your relationships too, right? Like, someone's like, let's do this to the house, and the other person's like, wait a second, I'm not ready. Um, I think the beautiful thing in that is that, again, there's always a solution, there's always an opportunity, is that we get to just understand each other more and realize, what, not everyone on this planet is the same, nor are they going to agree on on like, we're never going to get like a unanimous, this is right or this is wrong.
Mm.
It's just, there's so much variety and diversity, and we need that. And if there can be a way to include that in our businesses and our cultures and our family, like, we're all so much richer for it.
When one of the other principles was the people going through the same change often still feel alone. I'm
Mm,
wondering what you're like, because obviously, organizations are roll out changes all the time, and
mhm,
whether they're system changes or organizational structure changes, whatever. I find that
yeah.
interesting then that even like so there's no solace then with everyone else. Like how does that work, and how do you help people if they feel alone in that change?
Yeah. I mean, from a spiritual perspective, you could look at, this illusion that we are separate or an
Mm.
ego development. Like, we come from this place of being in the womb and then we realize we're separate, but are we really, really separate? But, I think a lot of that has to do with conversation, right? Like when I lead group work, um, there's so much power in it, uh, because one person expresses something and then everyone else is like, "Oh my god, I'm so glad they said that. I was feeling the same thing." Right? So inside of that, it's like someone feeling okay to even say this is what I'm feeling and just, that seeing that even in that in a group situation, I think if there's a space of safety, we can all admit that we feel uncomfortable multiple times a day. And just remembering, it's that first when we talked about it, people feeling ill at ease, awkward, self-conscious, um just remembering that that's just part of it. We're all going to feel this. And I think it's just a place where we bring in compassion. And I think this is why, again, why groups are so important. um we grow in community. We need that. This is not an individual for themselves. I believe it really is like an individual transforming within themselves to support the greater good. So I feel like giving a person tools
Hmm.
to navigate the discomfort is really helpful. And then also having spaces where there can be conversation and and practices where we're building compassion, we're letting go of judgment, we're softening the edges of right and wrong.
Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting. Well, Michelle, this has been a really good conversation. I'd love to hear kind of the three things you want to leave top of mind for people.
Hmm. Yeah, it feels like we went to a lot of places.
We did.
Well, don't run away from a bear.
Yeah.
Do your research before you go to places with a bear. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Um, I think just, looking at what are the things I can change within myself, because that's really the place where we have the most authority,
Yeah.
the personal development and the personal responsibility to help as a leader or even as an individual with the conflicts or the tensions that are showing up. So immediately going to, okay, I know I have a role in this somehow, and starting to just kind of dance with that information a little bit more, gets people out of victim mentality and it puts people in a place of empowerment. So
Mm,
I'd say that. um I did say unexpectedly, surprisingly, but not self-care.
yeah.
How can we develop practices for that, to really what it is our nervous systems get to settle down,
Mm,
and in that space, remembering that that is where we are creative. So setting up structures within your own life, conscious structures, right? That might mean it's not about 3 hours of TV tonight. It might mean that I need to take some quiet time. I need to go for a walk. I need to make sure I exercise. I need to journal, or I get to, like it's not like, even I get to create this time and
mhm,
space to help with my growth, my presence, my contribution. Um, and I didn't say this, but this is such a big one for me with my personality and how I operate, is to have fun.
mm,
Like, like how can we bring that play back into our spaces? Because that thing we all knew as kids is like we tap into the wonder and the possibility, and we start to like excavate ourselves from everything we may have learned, passed down generally generationally or culturally, um, that that would make us think that life is supposed to be hard,
Right.
and I think when a person can find ways to reintroduce that play and creativity into their lives, it's just so much more of a pleasant ride. And
Mm,
again, when you're taking care of that for yourself, you're not alone. Like even smiling at the person at the grocery store, like that has a ripple effect beyond what we realize.
yeah.
So I think all those kind of sit together.
It's
Um,
it's hard
yeah.
to yeah, it's hard to get out of your own self-focus. I have I tend to be a very transactional person, and so when I'm
Yeah.
out, I really try to think about that as like, and I often slip into my old habits. But how are you interacting with people, that you don't aren't probably going to see again? But and
Mm,
I tend to just be very transactional. But to your point, you don't know where they're at and what impact that interaction is going to have on them. And so it's really important to show up everywhere, that it's not just about you and how you feel in the moment. And I think
yeah.
it's hard to remember.
Well, just to kind of put a little turn on that too, like you and how you feel in the moment. If you're tending to that and taking care of that, you can't help but walk into the gym and have a short conversation with the person behind the desk,
Mm,
or ask the person who's helping you in the store about how their day's going. Like it's because in and of itself, you're opening. Right? You stop the pattern of holding on in fear of there's not enough, or I need to protect this.
mm,
It's like, hey, there's enough for everybody. So, you know, you could look at it as it is transactional, but you're just being you. You're giving yourself permission. And that has a ripple effect. You're giving yourself permission to be you. You're giving yourself permission to be in joy. And it does for absolutely no reason.
mm. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your insights. How can people learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so you can go to michelleboulé.com. We have some free resources on there that will put you on our newsletter. And it's at michelle.boulé on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook too. So I'm sure you'll put those in the show notes and people
Mhm.
can just click on there, send me a DM if you want. Happy to talk about any of these points or see if there's a way that I can help any of your listeners or their organizations.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I really enjoyed having you.
Thank you so much.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organization.
Hey! It's your